Hello, hello, hello. This is your Captain Panic speaking. And finally, welcome back to another Touchdesigner tutorial. Before I get started, I want to say sorry again for not being as active as I used to be. This has some reasons, some of them I want to mention. And yeah, because I reached a point where I can't reply to every message I get, or I can't answer every question that pops up in the comments or on my Patreon or wherever, and I feel like I have to explain it, so you don't want to feel like I ignore you or anything. But I am currently really heavily overworked. I am nearly working a full-time job whilst my freelancing and everything. I recently had COVID, and on top of everything I moved from Munich to Berlin and blah blah blah. But it's a lot on my table recently. And another thing that stopped me from working as good as I can is that I am currently, which you might recognize from the bad acoustics, working in my kitchen because my apartment is too small to fit a desk. So I'm sitting at my kitchen table with my PC on a little skateboard, which I roll into the kitchen whenever I work, and when I eat, I roll it out again. It's not the best conditions to work, and blah blah blah. The point of the story is I'm sorry, and I am currently working things out to get better, but I ask for a little patience, and whilst that I'm trying my best to maintain my tutorials. So now we actually get started with the tutorial, which you could already see in the background what we're going to create today. So when I restart that, you will see it's time for another lazy painting, which is a series I started a while ago and then didn't really maintain. But basically it's all about setting up a painterly thingy in Touchdesigner where you don't have to paint by yourself, because it's not that fun to mess with the colors and clean it up again. So you just can let it happen on your PC and not have to clean a mess. And this time I wanted to create something dreamy, something a little bit cheesy, which is this kind of cloud painting watercolor thing. It reminds me of clouds, which I really love. I really love the sky, and that's how I came up with this setup. We are going to have a look on it today. It's actually quite simple, but it has some interesting steps, I think, which make it interesting for a tutorial. So I thought, why not? And before I talk even more, let's get started and see you on my screen. So, welcome on my screen. In my setup, you can see my default startup setup, which I'm always using. If you want to use it, sign up to my Patreon and you can download it. Or if you don't want to sign up for my Patreon, I recorded a tutorial for this setup, which will speed up your workflow, and you will find it on my YouTube under Quick Resolution Switch, I think it's called. And then you can just create that setup by yourself. I highly recommend to use it because it really speeds up the workflow. So, yeah. But let's actually get started with the tutorial. So, one thing I did was we will start with a circle. So create a circle top. And then I am using my resolution on it. And for that, I'm just copying my resolution from my startup file on the x-axis and the y-axis. And then I'm going to use this as my native resolution for the whole setup. As you can see, I'm working with a really high resolution here. You can also go with HD or like this or anything, but I highly recommend to do to go as high as possible, because it gives all the nice and crispy details which we will need for the clouds. And another thing I did in this circle is I'm going to use 32-bit float also for the details. And then let's make the circle a little bit smaller, and also let's connect it to a null, which we will make visible in the background so we can see what's going on. Okay, so another thing I did, I want this circle to have a color, and I went with something like this. It's not really that important which color you choose, but I chose this color so because I just like it. Yeah, then I just copied that circle because I want two circles, which gives the painting in the end a more interesting vibe. And the only thing I changed in that second circle is the color. I just went with something else, like a lilac color, and then I just left it like that. And the second thing we will need is a transform. So just bring in that transform here, which we are going to use to animate our circle. So first thing I did, I scaled down the circle a little bit more. So I brought it down to 0.2. And to animate our circle, you could either make it interactive by bringing in a mouse in. But in my case, I want it to be fully generative. So I chose the noise chop, which I place here. Then the first thing I will do is change it from this graph mode to time slice, because I just want numbers. And then I renamed the channels, so I just made a TX, oops, not that, and a TY, which will define the parameter for the x-axis and the y-axis. And then after it, I made a math, which will regulate the range we are moving on our screen. So one thing I did, I was from range -1 to 1, because this parameter has minus numbers and it has plus numbers, so we need to change that range from -1 to 1. And I don't want the circle to move from -1 to 1. I just want it to move from minus 0.7 to 0.7. And now let's connect it to a null. Make it a little bit smaller. We don't need it that big. So it just keeps the node system a little bit more organized. And then just make the viewer active here, and then export that on the x-axis of the translate and the y-axis. And the reason why I put minus 0.7 or 0.7 is that I don't want this circle to leave our canvas completely. So if I leave it on -1, and 1, you will see it really gets a little bit out of control. So it moves kind of in our canvas, but it gets lost from time to time. So if you just regulate that from minus 9.7 to 9.7, it kind of keeps in our space, which is what we want. All right. So now we have our second circle, which we also want to animate. So what I will do is I just copy that transform, bring it over here, and now we could use the same thing here, but then this circle would move around the same, and as you can see here, we won't get 2 brushes. So what I did was just copy my noise here, paste it down here, and then in that third noise I will just change the seed and then export our null on our second circle here. So now we have 2 different brushes moving around. Amazing. Now we need to bring those 2 together by creating a composite, change the operation mode to over, and bring the second one in, and voila. We have 2 circles moving around very nervously. If you think this brush is moving around too fast, which I think, you could just change some parameters in the noise. And this is exactly what I did. So I just cranked up the period to 4 here and also to 4 here. And then it just moves around a little bit slower. It still has some variance, but it's more smooth and calm. All right. Okay, so now let's move on. What I did was I just brought in a blur here because I want the edges of our circles to be a little bit smoother. And I set it to 4 on the pre-shrink and to 32 in the filter size, because I want it to be really, really, really soft. So yeah. Okay. So now what I also want is I want to have many different colors in our cheesy clouds. And I did that by bringing in a noise. So make a noise and just use both inputs. So this first one will set our resolution, the second one will use the coordinate map from our input. But I don't want to have both of those multiplied. So I just change the output mode to noise. And then I set up the period a little bit more, get rid of harmonics, and bring in, turn off the monochrome. So I have some different colors happening here. Now let's change the seed a little bit. And I want those colors to change. So let's animate that noise by going under the transform tab and the set axis and just typing abs time dot seconds and multiply it with 0.1. So it's changing the colors kind of smooth. Okay, cool. Now we want to bring these colors into this alpha channel setup. So we wanted to have transparency again. So I made a inside, and we want these colors to be inside this mask. So we need to make this one the first input and this one the second input. Perfect. Okay, now let's give us some more space again, and let's create a null because we finished our first steps, and now we will create a feedback loop. So what I did was just I want to record the movement of our brush. So our first feedback loop is just to record the colors, basically. So let's make a composite. I set the operation mode to maximum. And then make a feedback here, drag it in here, and make this one the target layer. Now you can already see we are recording our movement, which looks kind of ugly now. And to be able to reset our feedback, I'm creating a keyboard in, which I will place above the feedback, make the viewer active, and export it onto the pulse. So when I hit 1, I'm resetting everything. Cool. So another thing I want our motion to blur a little bit. So I created a blur after this, which I just left on default. So filter size 7 and just everything else stays the same, because I don't want these edges to be there. I just want it to be this smooth and soft brush stroke. Perfect. And another thing, I want it to slightly disappear, to slightly fade out in the end. So I made a level and set the opacity under post to 0.97. And yeah, that's it for the first feedback loop. Amazing. So now let's create another null, just in case we want to insert, or you want to insert something in there again. Because now, before we do anything else, there will be a second feedback loop where we will use this tracked thing to create our cloud thing. So once again, let's make a comp. And also in this comp, I set the operation mode to maximum. And then let's make a feedback, connect it here, make this one the target layer. And yeah. Okay, perfect. Also, let's use the keyboard in here again on the pulse, so we can reset both at the same time. Okay. So let's give us some more space, because we will insert some stuff in this feedback loop. And the first thing after that feedback we will create is a displace. Also, let's move this up a little bit, because right there we will also have some stuff. And okay, so this displace, we need to set the displace weight to 0.01 on both axes and leave everything else on default. And then we will create another noise. For that noise, we only use the first input here for the resolution. So you could also use this or whatever. You just need that first input to be some kind of your setup to have the same resolution as we are using everywhere. Then once again change the output to just noise. Make sure the pixel format is 32-bit float. And then in that noise I made some changes. So I want the harmonics to be 10, so really high. So it gives us this kind of cloudy feeling we are having here. And also I set down the exponent to 0.5 because I want more contrast, just like this. And all right, everything else keeps the same. Another thing I did was bringing in another noise after it. So make this noise the first and the second input here. And then once again change the output to just noise. And in this noise I want it to be colorful, so I turned off the monochrome. And everything else keeps on default except for the exponent. I set the exponent to 2.6 because I don't want it to be that high contrast. I just want it to look like this. And then we will use this one as the second input for this displays. And when we set it, you can already see we are getting some structure in our brush here, which is cool. But right now it doesn't really look like a cloud. It looks kind of cool and kind of distorted and nice, but I want it to be more soft and more cloudy. So I want it to spread a little bit more. So I brought in another displays after that. And in that displays, I will use the same noise, but combined with a slope. So out of this noise 6, we will create a slope, which we will set to strength 8 and sample step 5 and 5. So what this slope does, it will push our pixels to blow up a little bit and to give us this kind of soft, cloudy feeling. And after that slope, I inserted blur to make it even more soft. So let's push those over a little bit to have more space, and then connect it to this displays. And oops, looks kind of cool, but I forgot to turn down the displace weight. And the displace weight in this case needs to be really, really low. So maybe go with 0.001 at first. And then, yeah, maybe have it a little bit higher. Maybe 0.7 is cool. So, yeah. Yeah, that looks kind of good. So now you can see we're getting more soft edges here. So when I turn it off again, turn it on, you might see the difference this gives us. So when we turn off this blur, it stays a little bit more detailed and more rough on the edges. And if you bring up the blur, it's more there. So feel free to play around with that blur because it's highly affecting everything, as you can see. So I decided to keep it kind of low, maybe on filter size 3, because I really like the hard edges. And another thing you can play around with is the displace weight here. So the higher it gets, the more blurry the edges get. So you can just maybe combine this, it gets more abstract or more like an abstract painting like this, and yeah, no limits on this. These are just numbers I went with. Okay. All right, so we are nearly done with this tutorial. Now we just need to bring in some background, which I will do by just bringing in a transform in the end, making the background color having no alpha channel, comp over background, and then we have a night sky when we leave it on black and a white sky when we turn it white, or a red sky, or whatever color you think is kind of cool. I think some off-white is kind of sweet, not that fully white, but a little bit of red in it. And now let's just make one little detail which gives us more depth I don't know, I can't pronounce that word, but it just gives us a more vivid feeling of everything. So one thing I did was bring in a Luma Blur into this setup. So we have some sharp edges, but also some blurry edges, which makes it look even more dreamy. So first of all, create a Luma Blur. And what this Luma Blur does, you will use a map, and this map, let's use itself. You can set the black filter width and the white filter width here. And basically what this does, when I turn up the black filter width, it will blur everything that is recognized as dark in our map we are going to use to blur. So now we can just set the black value and the white value. So basically how much contrast everything has. So you can already see what it does. So the darker areas like this, in this area, the alpha channel will blur everything. And yeah, so you could use the same map in the Luma Blur and then just play around with these values. But what I did, I want this image to be a monochrome high contrast thing, which we will use here. So what I just did was bring in another noise, use both inputs, change the output to just noise, and then we will get this high contrast black and white thing, which is called a noise. And I just set the period a little bit higher, maybe go with 2. I got rid of harmonics, but I turned down the exponent, which gives us even more contrast, which makes it easier for the Luma Blur to decide, okay, which is the black area, which is the white area. And then you can just play around with the seed and get some random areas. And then you can just play around how blurry you want which area to be. And this makes it, yeah, more dreamy, I think. So let's play it again. And let's draw some skies. Yeah. So this is it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. Once again, I want to mention, in my tutorials, I don't really teach groundbreaking new techniques with every tutorial I make. I just share my progress and everything I do, which I think I like. And then I just want to show how I did it. And I'm no technological mastermind getting every operator and doing new things every time, and just use my tools, everything I understood, everything I get, to create as much as possible. And this is what I come up with, and I mostly do random feedback loops combined with each other, and this is what got me everywhere. So you don't have to be a genius coder or get every operator to do cool things. This is what I want to say with this, I guess. So just experiment the hell out of Touchdesigner. This is what gives you, or gives me, most pleasure and everything. So please do that, and please stay kind and take care of yourself and everything. Stay creative, stay kind. See you next time. Bye bye.